The first thing I'm going to tell you is what we're going to talk about tonight is not prescriptive. I'm not giving you a magical solution for whatever problems you're encountering in your manuscript. What I hope to do is show you that you can come up with your own insane, crazy version of what I do. I mean, I don't have a problem with you doing it the way that I do it, but I don't want anyone sitting here thinking that they've come to something that's like, this is the one way, this is the true way, if you do it this way, all your problems will be solved. I happen to think that anyone in the writing life who preaches the one way is a con artist. And they're not serving you well, because there's definitely not one way. And if you talk to 3 writers, you've probably heard 3 different ways of doing things. I always like to sort of get a feel for the room. How many people here have attempted a long-form work, something where there's short story? Okay, good. How many people here outlined that work? Okay. By the way, being someone who outlines is great. That's one of the ways. And this might, particularly for the people who outline, this might seem incredibly crazy because this is sort of an outline after the fact, and that makes no sense. Who would do that? Where does this craziness come from? The beginning of my craziness, and it will seem very strange as we go through this, but I've really wanted for a long time to talk about this in an organized way. It began by accident with my 4th novel, which was a novel in the Tess Monahan series, and I didn't really understand what was going on. So I started trying to, and I don't work from an outline, I work intuitively toward what I think the end is. I generally know the big secret in my book, generally. And what I do is I try to figure out, how do my characters get there? How do they figure out? How do they come to that? And that's my way, just my way. Not the only way, not the way I'm saying people have to do it. Happens to be the way I do it. Once in my life, I outlined a work. And it was the most pleasurable writing experience of my life. So why wouldn't I continue to outline my work? I don't know. I really don't. I was forced to outline it. The outline was forced on me by the people who commissioned the work. It was a serial for the New York Times Magazine. It was a shorter piece. It was 40,000 words. And they said, no, you have to give us the chapter-by-chapter outline of this book. And I'd never done that before, and I found it immensely intimidating, and it took a long time. But once I did it, I just sailed through that piece, and it was wonderful. I have such happy memories of writing that. So there is kind of I have, I think, sort of a masochistic streak, or really more correctly, I do have a romance about, the quote's been attributed to various writers, no surprise for the writer, no surprise for the reader. I like being surprised while I'm working on my work. That's me, that's how I do it. I'll say it again. I would never tell anyone that how I do it is the right way or the best way. I'd be more inclined to tell you it's kind of a kooky way, but it's my way. And it's something I came to, and it's something that has kept me from bogging down in the middle of the work. How many people here believe in writer's block? You're wrong. I don't believe in it. And I'm not saying you're wrong, but I personally don't believe in it. Now you might say that's almost sort of like, I don't want to say the name of, I don't want to say Candyman 3 times in a row because he might appear in the mirror and take away my novel. I just refuse to believe in writer's block. Instead, what I think of when people talk about writer's block is I think that it's a point where you bog down in perfectionism. It's really hard to go forward if it has to be perfect. At the same time, I think even for writers who don't believe in perfectionism, I think even for writers who outline, almost everybody comes to a point in a manuscript where they feel a little bit stuck. Does anyone here, and by the way, it's not a rhetorical question, I really want to hear, if anyone here has said, oh no, I have never been stuck in the middle of a manuscript. I mean, it's a really open-ended question. It's okay to say, no, plotting is not my problem. I've never been stuck. I've never not known what the next day's work is going to be. Okay, so no one is saying that, and that's what we're really here to talk about, is wherever you get stuck in your manuscript, there's probably something you can do. I first started creating what I call visual designs for my novels quite by accident. I was trying to figure out what was going on in my fourth novel. I was trying to figure out if it was suspenseful, and I started to just write down a list of the events in a typical classic linear fashion. And I was like, well, that doesn't really show me the shape of the story. Especially in writing suspense, the shape really matters. Where are the surprises? Where are the reversals? Your character moves forward, your character falls backwards. And I said, I'm going to draw this as it's really happening. And when I looked at what I had on the paper, it looked like a very strange game of chutes and ladders. The character went up, the character went down, the character went up, the character went down, and on and up the page. And I found it enormously helpful. That was with my fourth novel. I didn't really attempt to do this again until I was working on a seventh novel. And in that case, it was simply that there were two locations of the action that were occurring concurrently in parallel time, and I had to draw these two linear charts. I would have brought that to you today, but some particularly devoted fans, John Jordan and Ruth Jordan, for those who know them, have it in their collection. About the same time, I began teaching at Goucher College under the guidance and really the mentorship of Madison Smart Bell. And Madison wrote a book called Narrative Design, which is primarily about short stories, which was what we were teaching in the creative writing program because it's well suited to a semester's length of time. And if you look at this book, you'll see that it has very traditional graphs of what short stories look like. You know, some short stories are sort of denoted by rising action. It rises up, there's the climax, it falls shortly up. Some have like a series, it looks like the spine of a dinosaur drawn by a 5-year-old, where you have like a series of triangles going like that. And I began to think about whether every work of fiction had a visual analog, if you will. Could you break down a work of fiction into something that was less reliant on words? And in doing so, what would you learn? Now, again, it's really important to listen to this part. I made all this up. So there are no rules. And so even in doing it, even in creating these visual designs, I'm already kind of imposing my will on them. But generally now, what I experience is I write my novels, it's been established, I write without outlines. I attempt to write up to 4 drafts in a year, which requires me to work pretty quickly. Although I have the luxury, and believe me, I do not use that word lightly, I have the luxury of being a full-time writer. I no longer have a day job. I did write my first 7 novels while working in a day job, but I'm intensely aware of the fact that I have a pretty cushy life because I get to do this full-time. But don't pay attention to the pace. That just happens to be the pace that I work at for my particular reasons. I'm trying to go through these drafts. I try to go all the way through a rough draft. Very rough, I very seldom make it anymore. I would say for the last couple of years, about anywhere from halfway to 2/3 of the way through the novel, I've had to stop and say, I don't know what's going on anymore. I'm not in control of this material anymore. I don't know if people are behaving like human beings anymore. I don't know if the surprises are surprises. I don't know if there's tension. I don't know if there's suspense. Now, for most of us, and again, I'm going to ask, have a lot of people felt this way when they're writing? You can just, I see nods, show of hands. And the problem for the writer is that all we have are these words on pages. And it doesn't matter if you're working on a computer or on legal pads or on an old typewriter. It doesn't matter. All you've got is words on pages, and you go, as I call it, you go text blind. Like, I can't see this anymore. I can't, I'm sure I'm going to ask again. Does everyone come to the point where it's like, I don't know if this is a good sentence or a bad sentence? This is either the best sentence I ever wrote or it's the worst sentence I ever wrote. I think I love this, I mean, you really begin to kind of lose perspective in the middle of a book. And so I began using visual aids to let me get away from words. Can I come up with a way to diagram my novel so it's not text reliant? And my theory was that I would learn something if I began to assign shape and color and all sorts of other kind of visual gimmicks to what I was working on. No rules. I could decide whatever I wanted to call something, how I wanted to decide the shape of a thing. But I had to find a way to get away from text. So I gotta find my errors. I'm new. My first PowerPoint ever. Oh, this is, my stepson set it up so it would do it this way. So he thought that was very cool. So that's just the title card. Okay, this is very standard. This is basically storyboarding. Anyone who's worked for the screen has probably worked on a system like this, where you break a work down. You can break it down by scene, you can break it down by chapter. However you break it down, doing it this way, and this is on index cards, it allows you to move things around, to begin to see that, you may believe with all your heart, because you've been staring at the words on the page, that there's no way that the events of chapter 28 can come before the events of chapter 24. But when you look at it this way, you begin to feel the freedom. It feels very scary and onerous to move your chapters around inside the computer. But when you just take index cards and throw them up on, a piece of tag board, you sort of sigh and you take a deep breath, and now you're already getting perspective. Now you notice in this one, this is really simple, and this is from The Most Dangerous Thing. It's not that every book demands a really complicated structure or a visual structure. This is simply, there were, Lord help me, 10 different characters with point of view in this novel. Thank God one of them died in the first chapter, so it's down to 9. And it took place in the past, it took place in the present, and all I did with this, and it was really simple, oh, didn't mean to do that, sorry about that, was assign a color-coded index card to an individual point of view. I knew there would be roughly 40 chapters in this book, and so I laid them in a grid that was 5 by 8. Like you might say, why 5 by 8? I'd say, why not? It's a nice shape, it's a square. And if you really start to sort of like pick apart, like, but there's no, it's like, it's okay. Because part of what you're doing when you're doing this is you're rediscovering one of the most important elements that a lot of writers begin to lose. It's the element of play. What we do is actually fun. I know we forget that. I know it might not feel that way. But why did you start doing it? There is an element of play and fun in writing a novel. And when you're only dealing with the words and the sentences, and I don't think I've set up this scene, you really can begin to lose it. So as I walk over to this, I'll carry my mic with me. So it's really basic. You see that there are different colors for different points of view. And all I'm looking for is variety, pleasing variety. If I had this to do over again, I would actually go out and find different colored cards, which would make a much more striking visual representation. I was in New Orleans without a car, so this is all I could get to at the local Walgreens. But it helped me, and I looked at it, and I was like, okay, it's in balance. That's the primary thing. This is really very simplistic. All I learned from this is that all the characters are showing up and they're getting to talk. Like you can see this green sort of pops out, and she's even down there. This is a close-up, and I have a handout that actually shows the full chart. And I'm trying to make sure that everyone's represented, everyone's getting to show up, that no one character is beginning to dominate this story, because this was a story about two groups of people. Really, really basic. That's basic storyboarding. And then you do this and you realize that, oh my goodness, that chapter I thought could never, ever, ever move. It really could move. I mean, I know this sounds bizarre, but creating a physical manifestation away from the computer, you feel much freer to play with this. A little nervous about playing what's in here. You're like, oh no, I might wreck it, I might lose it. And the whole time you're doing this, you feel like you're procrastinating, but you're really not. But procrastination, of course, is an amazing tool. Like when you get back to this sense of play, it's like, I'm not writing today, I'm playing with my cards, I'm playing with my images. The single most important storyboard I probably ever made is this one. And it comes from a novel called I'd Know You Anywhere. And I was stuck. I was really, really, really stuck. This is only, it's maybe a third of the novel. It might be a little bit more. It might be as much as 40% of the novel that resulted. But I don't think it is. And I couldn't go forward. What you can't see on this slide, I'm afraid, and I will get a handout, is that when I first designed this, this is a novel about a woman. She's represented by the green, who, when she was 15 years old, was kidnapped and raped by a man who raped and killed all his other victims. She's the only one who lived. She's the penultimate victim, and she's never really known why she lived. This is her in the present day. She hasn't been in touch with him. She's actually a sort of astonishingly healthy person, a mother, settled in the Washington suburbs. And her captor on death row in Virginia writes her a letter and says he wants to meet with her. Now, typically when we think about our work, we think about it in a really linear way. Chapter, 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 chapter. But that's really not how our minds work, and it's not how memory works. So I realized that it wouldn't be, here's Eliza, here's Walter. It wouldn't line up, but they're overlapping in time. Furthermore, just to complicate the structure, there are scenes told from her 15-year-old self, the summer she was kidnapped. And those also overlap with the present day. Now, what you can't see on this slide, and I apologize for that error on my part, is that for a long time, there was one more orange card at the end of this. And I have a close-up that I can give out to people. And that card, that orange card, represented the point of view of the man on death row. And it was a quotidian day in his life on death row. I think even with it missing, you can see that the green and the yellow triangle, well, they're more interesting. Something very different happened there. We've got square, square, and what happened is for the first time in the novel, the 15-year-old Elizabeth, as she was known then, bled directly into the adult Eliza sitting at her kitchen table and listening to a tea kettle sing and trying to figure out what she was going to do. And once I laid this out and I saw that little orange card that isn't on the slide hanging off at the end, I was like, cut it off. This looks better. And that's where this gets weird. But oh, and that's where I somehow managed to just keep leaning on things. I'm really, it's where it gets weird. Is that the idea is that you can't read anything, can you? I mean, there were little notes on these cards about what chapter numbers they were, and sometimes I think I even put word counts on them, so I was sort of keeping track of whether my chapters were not unwieldy. You could almost imagine going into a gallery, granted not a very good one, and seeing this as a graphic that was for sale. It's not overly symmetrical, It's not too bad, but it sort of has form. But I couldn't find it until I saw it with the orange card hanging on the end. I was like, well, that's just anticlimactic. I've gotten to the end of the first section of the novel, and clearly the climax is when the two selves merge. Because we're never, in the rest of the novel, going to see the 15-year-old girl again. This is the only section in which the past appears. And going forward, the sections are going to be quite different, and new characters are going to be introduced. This is the only chart I did for I'd Know You Anywhere. I didn't have to do the rest of it. And I did it when, as I said, I don't even think I was a third of the way in. It's a 40-something chapter novel, and this represents only 20, maybe 22 chapters. I included other slides from it. Just, you know, again, this is just going from bottom to top. Here are some close-ups. But that says up there, it's just one line from, doesn't that girl have a shine on her? The tea kettle sings. And then there was the quotidian day. You know, you don't need it. I mean, I'll go backwards to sort of show that. Who wants that? Who wants that orange rectangle showing up when you've had the great split? It's time for the novel to take a big change, and it does in the next section, bringing in new characters and new situations. I do have copies of a lot of this. I only have 25 of each slide that I'm showing you, and you can see how it lined up. There's the word counts. But then, to go backwards again, what really matters is the big picture, to use the cliche. But that's what you're looking for. Can you break your work down so that you've learned something? You should discover something. It should solve a problem. This is something that you go to when you suspect that there is a problem. If everything's humming along, by the way, if you're doing just great, don't stop. Oh my goodness, no. I would never say this is something you must do, that if you don't do this, you've got a problem. This is for when you're bogged down. This is when you feel like, I can write tomorrow, but I don't think it's necessarily going to fit. I don't know where to go. I'm not sure I did everything I wanted to do so far in this particular book. And it's a twofold thing. It is the literal visual representation, a chance to look at something differently, without words. But it also gives you a break from being so focused on the words. You step away from the work in progress, so you're working yet you're not working. You're procrastinating yet you're not procrastinating. It's really kind of the ideal way to be as a writer.